Miss, please come here. Everyone deserves to witness this.
Me?
Stop the music. The command wasn't shouted, yet it cut through the ballroom with the weight of thunder. Crystal chandeliers continued to glow above the marble floor, but every conversation died before the last note from the string quartet could fade away. Hundreds of executives, philanthropists, politicians, and journalists turned toward the center of the grand ballroom inside the Crown Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. Their eyes settled on one man, Nathaniel Brooks, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Brooks Dynamics, the billionaire who had transformed a struggling engineering startup into one of America's most influential technology companies. He was known for precision, for discipline, for reading people faster than they could read themselves. He never interrupted events. He never caused scenes. And he certainly never froze. Yet tonight, something had stopped him cold. His champagne glass remained suspended halfway to his lips, his sharp blue eyes fixed on someone across the room. Not an investor, not a senator, not the celebrity host standing beneath the golden stage lights. His gaze followed a young black waitress quietly collecting empty glasses near the edge of the ballroom. She moved with calm efficiency, almost invisible among the polished suits and designer gowns surrounding her. Her name was Amara Johnson, 25 years old, temporary banquet staff. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. She wasn't supposed to become the center of the evening. She certainly wasn't supposed to make the most powerful man in the room forget the speech he had rehearsed for weeks. Nathaniel lowered his glass without taking a sip. His expression never changed, but everyone close enough to see him realized something impossible had happened. The man who controlled billion-dollar negotiations looked genuinely stunned. His executive assistant leaned closer, expecting instructions about the schedule. Instead, Nathaniel slowly raised one hand and pointed across the ballroom. Every head followed the direction of his finger until it landed on Amara. She didn't notice. She was helping an elderly guest adjust a chair before quietly replacing a folded napkin that had slipped onto the floor. Simple gestures, ordinary moments, the kind that disappeared inside luxury events every single night. Then Nathaniel spoke 5 words that rippled across the ballroom faster than any announcement. "Bring her to me." Silence answered him. The event coordinator blinked in confusion. 2 security officers exchanged uncertain glances. A hotel manager immediately looked toward the banquet supervisor, who suddenly felt every camera in the room shifting in his direction. Reporters lowered their phones from the stage and turned them toward the unknown waitress instead. Whispers spread table by table like wind moving across still water. Did she spill something? Did she interrupt the CEO? Did she break protocol? Nobody knew. That uncertainty made the silence even heavier. Amara finally sensed the room watching her. She lifted her eyes and found hundreds of strangers staring back. The conversations had vanished. Even the photographers had stopped taking pictures of the gala's distinguished guests. For a brief moment, she wondered whether someone else stood behind her. There wasn't. Every gaze belonged to her now. The banquet supervisor hurried across the floor, forcing a reassuring smile that failed to hide his nervousness. "Amara," he whispered carefully, "Mr. Brooks wants to see you." She looked toward the billionaire standing beneath the golden lights. He hadn't moved. He hadn't smiled. He simply waited, his eyes never leaving hers. Around them, assumptions multiplied faster than facts. Some guests pitted the young waitress before she had spoken a single word. Others quietly expected an embarrassing misunderstanding. A few reached for their phones, convinced they were about to witness another uncomfortable headline from a room where wealth usually controlled every outcome. Only Nathaniel Brooks knew why he had stopped the gala. Only Nathaniel knew what he had seen just moments earlier. And only he understood that before this extraordinary night was over, the least visible person in the ballroom would quietly change the way every powerful person in that room understood dignity, character, and true leadership. Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Table. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. Amara set the silver tray onto a nearby service station before taking a slow, steady breath. She had learned years ago that panic only made difficult moments harder. Around her, fellow servers avoided eye contact, each silently hoping the attention would move somewhere else. The banquet supervisor gently straightened the sleeve of her black uniform, as though removing an invisible wrinkle could somehow protect both of them from whatever was about to happen. "Just answer honestly," he whispered. "If there has been a misunderstanding, we will fix it." Amara simply nodded. She did not remember making a mistake. Every glass had been polished. Every table had been set exactly according to the event plan. Every guest had been greeted with the same quiet respect she offered everyone who crossed her path. Yet the entire ballroom now watched her as though she had suddenly become the headline of the evening. Across the room, conversations returned only as faint whispers. A venture capitalist leaned toward another guest. "I have worked with Nathaniel Brooks for 15 years, he murmured. "He never singles out hotel staff." A television reporter quietly adjusted her microphone even though no interview had been scheduled. Several guests discreetly lifted their phones beneath the tables, careful not to appear obvious. The uncertainty fascinated them. People expected dramatic moments when celebrities attended galas. They did not expect them to begin with an anonymous waitress. Amara began walking. Her polished black shoes crossed the marble floor one measured step at a time. The distance between her and Nathaniel felt much longer than the 30 feet separating them. Every crystal chandelier reflected against the glossy floor until it seemed she was walking through scattered stars instead of a hotel ballroom. She kept her shoulders relaxed, remembering something her grandmother had repeated throughout her childhood. "Walk with dignity before you ever speak with confidence." Those words had carried her through scholarship interviews, job rejections, unexpected disappointments, and countless evenings serving guests who never bothered to learn her name. Tonight they steadied her once again. Nathaniel never looked away. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but inside his mind the same image replayed over and over. It had happened less than 5 minutes earlier. A distinguished military veteran had quietly dropped a small leather envelope beside his chair while standing to greet another guest. No one noticed. Not the event planners. Not security. Not the investors gathered around him. Only one person had seen it. Amara had stepped forward without drawing attention to herself. She picked up the envelope, checked the engraved initials without opening it, and gently returned it to the gentleman with a warm smile that asked for nothing in return. The older man had thanked her softly, unaware that the envelope contained the handwritten speech he had planned to deliver later that evening honoring families of fallen first responders. Had it disappeared, the entire tribute would have unraveled into confusion. Nathaniel had witnessed every second from across the ballroom. Yet it was not simply the gesture that captured him. It was the way she quietly stepped back into the background afterward, refusing recognition, refusing applause, acting as though kindness required no audience. That was something Nathaniel had not seen in a very long time. As Amara finally stopped a few feet in front of him, the ballroom seemed to shrink into complete silence once again. She folded her hands calmly in front of her apron and met his eyes without arrogance or fear. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said gently. "How may I help you?" A faint smile almost appeared at the corner of Nathaniel's mouth before disappearing just as quickly. The guests noticed the smallest change in his expression and leaned forward almost in unison, convinced the next sentence would explain everything. Instead, Nathaniel asked a question so unexpected that it left the entire ballroom searching for an answer they had never imagined. "Miss Johnson," he said quietly, "who taught you that nobody has to be watching before you choose to do the right thing?" Amara did not answer immediately. The question lingered between them with a quiet weight that no one in the ballroom had expected. It was not an accusation. It was not a compliment. It sounded almost personal, and somehow that unsettled the audience even more. She glanced briefly toward the elderly veteran she had helped only minutes earlier. The gentleman had finally realized what Nathaniel was referring to. He gently touched the leather envelope now resting safely inside his jacket pocket and lowered his eyes with quiet gratitude. Amara turned back to the billionaire. "My mother," she answered softly. She believed that character only counts when nobody expects anything in return. The words were simple. There was no dramatic speech, no attempt to impress anyone. Yet the silence that followed somehow became even deeper. Nathaniel studied her expression. He had spent more than 2 decades negotiating with world leaders, investors, and founders who could hide entire strategies behind practiced smiles. He knew what ambition looked like. He knew what manipulation sounded like. But sincerity was different. Sincerity never demanded attention. It simply existed. Across the ballroom, guests exchanged puzzled glances. Some had expected an apology. Others had expected security to escort the waitress away after an embarrassing misunderstanding. Instead, they were listening to a conversation that felt strangely intimate despite taking place before nearly 400 people. The event host quietly lowered his notes. Even the photographers hesitated, uncertain whether pressing the shutter would somehow interrupt whatever invisible thread had formed between the billionaire and the young waitress. Nathaniel finally spoke again. "Do you know what was inside that envelope?" Amara gently shook her head. "No, sir. I only saw the initials on the outside. It belonged to the gentleman, so I returned it." "You never opened it?" he asked. "It was not mine to open." "You never asked for recognition?" "No, sir." "Why?" she offered. The smallest smile. "Because returning something to its owner is supposed to be normal." Several executives quietly shifted in their seats. The answer sounded almost uncomfortable. In boardrooms, extraordinary actions were often measured by headlines, bonuses, or promotions. Yet she spoke as though integrity required no reward at all. Nathaniel slowly looked around the ballroom. Faces that had entered the gala expecting another evening of polished speeches and expensive networking now reflected genuine curiosity. Some appeared thoughtful. Others looked quietly embarrassed without fully understanding why. The billionaire realized that every person in the room had witnessed the same moment only minutes earlier, yet only one person had truly seen it. He remembered watching Amara return the envelope with complete discretion. She had protected another person's dignity instead of creating an opportunity to receive praise. That decision had stayed with him because it reminded him of someone he had not thought about in years. His father. Long before Brooks Dynamics existed, before magazine covers and private jets, before conference stages and billion-dollar valuations, Nathaniel had been the son of a factory supervisor in a small Indiana town. One evening, his father found a wallet in a grocery store parking lot containing several $1,000s in cash. Money their family desperately needed. Nathaniel had been 12 years old. He remembered asking whether they could keep at least part of it. His father had smiled, placed the wallet back into the owner's hands, and later said something that shaped the rest of his life. Never let hardship decide your values. Nathaniel had built an empire on discipline, innovation, and relentless standards. Somewhere along the journey, however, he had begun measuring people almost entirely by performance. Watching Amara reminded him that the strongest measure of character often appeared in moments too small for headlines. He returned his attention to the young waitress standing calmly before him. She had no idea that one quiet decision had reopened a memory he thought success had buried forever. Around them, the gala remained. Perfectly still, as though the entire room instinctively understood that this conversation had quietly become far more important than the celebration they had gathered to attend. For several long seconds, Nathaniel Brooks remained silent. The ballroom had hosted Nobel Prize winners, decorated military leaders, governors, and some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country, yet no speech delivered beneath those crystal chandeliers had ever commanded attention the way simple silence did now. Amara stood patiently, neither lowering her eyes nor seeking approval. She simply waited. She had spent years learning that calm often revealed more than hurried explanations ever could. Nathaniel slowly reached for the microphone resting on the nearby podium, but instead of stepping onto the stage, he remained exactly where he was. That single decision surprised everyone. He had always preferred elevated platforms during public events. Tonight, however, he chose to stand on the same marble floor as every member of the hotel staff. His voice carried naturally through the quiet room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I interrupted this evening because I witnessed something I believe deserves your attention." A wave of anticipation swept across the audience. Investors leaned forward. Journalists prepared to capture every word. The hotel executives exchanged anxious glances, still uncertain whether praise or criticism was about to follow. Nathaniel turned slightly toward the elderly veteran seated near the front of the ballroom. "Sir, would you mind standing for just a moment?" The gentleman rose slowly, adjusting his navy blue blazer with quiet dignity. Nathaniel continued, "A few minutes ago, you accidentally dropped something that mattered a great deal to you. The veteran smiled softly before removing the familiar leather envelope from inside his jacket. I did, he answered, and I did not even realize it until this young woman handed it back to me. Nathaniel nodded. Did she announce it to the room? No. Did she ask for recognition? No. Did she even wait for me to notice? The older man chuckled gently. No, Mr. Brooks. She returned it before anyone else even realized it had happened. Nathaniel let those answers settle over the audience before speaking again. Most people celebrate extraordinary achievements. Tonight, I would like us to recognize an ordinary decision made with extraordinary integrity. The words landed differently than anyone expected. The ballroom remained perfectly still. Somewhere near the back of the room, a waiter quietly lowered the tray he had been carrying. Several guests who had secretly recorded the earlier moment slowly placed their phones back on the tables. Whatever dramatic confrontation they had anticipated had quietly transformed into something far more meaningful. Nathaniel looked directly at Amara once again. You believe nobody was watching? She nodded. Yes, sir. But someone was. He gently placed one hand over his heart before continuing. Leadership has convinced many people that success is measured by what we accomplish while everyone is watching. My father spent his entire life teaching me the opposite. He believed character is measured by what we choose when applause is impossible. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. Tonight you reminded me of that lesson. Across the ballroom, expressions began to change. The assumptions that had filled the room only minutes earlier slowly dissolved into reflection. The banquet supervisor who had feared a public complaint now stood motionless, realizing that the employee everyone overlooked each evening had become the quiet center of the gala. Amara felt dozens of unfamiliar eyes resting on her, but she resisted the temptation to shrink from the attention. She had never wanted recognition. She had only wanted to finish her shift with the same care she brought to every table she served. Nathaniel recognized that truth immediately. It was precisely why this moment mattered. Recognition pursued by ambition often faded with tomorrow's headlines. Recognition earned through integrity lingered much longer. As he looked across the room filled with influential people, he realized that many had arrived expecting to discuss innovation, investments, and market forecasts. Instead, they had unexpectedly received a reminder that the strongest foundation any leader could build was not wealth, influence, or reputation. It was the quiet habit of choosing what was right, especially when nobody expected anyone to notice. The applause began with a single pair of hands. The elderly veteran standing near the front of the ballroom smiled warmly as he applauded the young waitress who had expected nothing more than another ordinary shift. A second guest joined him, then another. Within seconds, the elegant ballroom filled with sincere applause that echoed beneath the towering crystal chandeliers. It was not the loud celebration reserved for business mergers or award ceremonies. It carried something quieter, something deeper. Respect. Amara felt the unexpected wave of appreciation surrounding her and instinctively looked toward the banquet supervisor, almost asking permission with her eyes to return to work. The supervisor simply smiled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time all evening. You earned this, he whispered softly. Nathaniel noticed the exchange and understood exactly what it revealed. Even now, standing before hundreds of influential guests, she remained focused on responsibility instead of recognition. That quiet instinct fascinated him far more than any polished acceptance speech ever could. Across the ballroom, conversations slowly resumed, but they no longer sounded the same. Earlier, guests had discussed market forecasts, artificial intelligence, investment strategies, and political fundraising. Now entirely different questions floated between the tables. How many people like her have we overlooked? One executive quietly asked his colleague. How often do we mistake position for character? Another guest wondered aloud. A journalist lowered her notebook and admitted to the photographer beside her. I thought this was going to become another uncomfortable corporate story. Instead, it became something people actually need to hear. Nathaniel slowly returned the microphone to its stand, but before stepping away, he addressed the audience once more. Success has introduced me to remarkable people, he said calmly. Scientists who changed industries, veterans who protected complete strangers, teachers who shaped future generations without expecting recognition. Tonight, I met another remarkable person, not because of a title, not because of wealth, simply because she chose integrity without expecting anyone to notice. Every eye returned to Amara once again. She felt slightly uncomfortable beneath the attention, but her expression remained composed. "Mr. Brooks," she said respectfully, "I appreciate your kindness, but I only did what anyone should do." Nathaniel smiled a little more openly than before. "That," he replied, "is exactly why this matters." Soft laughter drifted through the ballroom, breaking the remaining tension. For the first time since the evening had been interrupted, people smiled without uncertainty. Yet Nathaniel was not finished. He turned toward the president of the charitable foundation hosting the gala. "May I ask one favor?" The woman nodded immediately. "Of course. Would you allow Miss Johnson to join us for dinner this evening?" The request landed almost as unexpectedly as his first words had earlier. Several guests blinked in surprise. Hotel staff were never seated among keynote speakers, corporate leaders, and distinguished donors. Formal etiquette rarely allowed it. The foundation president glanced toward the hotel general manager, who answered with an approving nod before she even had time to ask. "We would be honored," she replied. Amara looked genuinely surprised. "Sir, I am scheduled to continue serving the remaining tables." Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "Someone else can carry the trays for one evening. Character deserves a seat at the table just as much as success does." The sentence settled gently across the room, leaving behind thoughtful silence instead of dramatic excitement. One by one, guests began standing from their chairs, not because protocol required it, but because something inside them quietly insisted that the moment deserved acknowledgement. Amara suddenly realized they were not standing for a billionaire. They were standing for a principle, for dignity that required no audience, for kindness that expected no reward. Nathaniel watched the room carefully and recognized something impossible to calculate on any financial statement. Influence could command attention. Wealth could purchase comfort. Authority could shape decisions. But only genuine character could inspire complete strangers to rethink the values they carried home after the lights of the ballroom faded into memory. Amara hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering. "If my supervisor approves, I would be honored." Her voice remained calm, almost unchanged, despite the extraordinary invitation hanging in the air. The banquet supervisor smiled with unmistakable pride. "Miss Johnson," he said warmly, "for the first time tonight, I am giving you an order that I hope you never forget. Please accept." Soft laughter rippled across the ballroom, easing the last traces of tension. A nearby server gently accepted the silver tray from Amara's hands. She thanked her coworker with a grateful smile before smoothing the sleeves of her uniform, suddenly aware that she was still dressed for service while surrounded by custom tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. For a brief moment, she wondered whether she truly belonged at the same table as the nation's most influential business leaders. Nathaniel seemed to recognize the uncertainty before she spoke a single word. "Miss Johnson," he said, "the clothes we wear tell people what job we have. They do not tell them who we are." The sentence settled quietly over the room. Several guests exchanged thoughtful glances. More than one executive instinctively looked down at an expensive watch or tailored jacket that suddenly seemed less important than it had an hour earlier. The foundation president personally escorted Amara toward the head table. Every step felt unfamiliar. Earlier that evening, she had walked through the ballroom, carrying trays of sparkling water and dessert plates. Now she crossed the very same floor with hundreds of guests respectfully making room for her. No spotlight followed her. None was needed. The atmosphere itself had changed. The elderly veteran stood as she approached. "Young lady," he said with gentle sincerity, "because of you, my granddaughter will hear the speech I promised her I would give tonight. Thank you for protecting something that meant more than paper." Amara smiled modestly. "I only returned what already belonged to you." The veteran nodded. "Exactly. That is becoming far too rare." Nathaniel listened carefully. Once again, she redirected every compliment away from herself. There was no performance in her humility. It was simply how she viewed the world. As everyone resumed their seats, dinner service quietly continued around them. The orchestra began playing once more, but the music sounded different now, softer somehow, as though the evening itself had become more reflective. Nathaniel poured a glass of sparkling water instead of champagne and placed it in front of Amara before serving himself. Several guests noticed the simple gesture. One billionaire serving another guest would not have attracted attention. A billionaire serving the woman who had been clearing tables only minutes earlier spoke without words. Across the table sat Dr. Eleanor Pierce, a renowned medical researcher whose innovations had transformed pediatric care. She smiled kindly at Amara. Nathaniel has introduced us to many remarkable people over the years, she said. Tonight, I believe he may have saved the best introduction for last. Amara looked slightly embarrassed. I am not remarkable, Dr. Pierce. The physician gently tilted her head. Most remarkable people say exactly that. Light conversation slowly resumed, but it no longer revolved around stock prices, acquisitions, or political influence. Instead, guests shared stories of teachers who changed lives, neighbors who quietly helped strangers, parents who sacrificed without recognition, and mentors who shaped futures without expecting applause. Nathaniel realized something extraordinary had happened without anyone planning it. One quiet act of integrity had redirected an entire evening filled with powerful people away from ambition and toward gratitude. Looking around the table, he recognized expressions he rarely witnessed during corporate gatherings. There was less competition, less performance, more listening, more sincerity. He remembered his father's old saying once again. A table becomes valuable because of the conversations shared around it, not because of the price of the chairs. Tonight, for the first time in many years, Nathaniel understood those words more deeply than ever before. And although almost everyone believed the most unforgettable moment of the gala had already passed, neither he nor Amara realized that the evening was quietly preparing an even greater revelation, one that would test whether the values everyone now applauded would still matter once difficult choices replaced comfortable words. The first course was served with the quiet elegance expected at one of Chicago's most prestigious charity galas, yet the atmosphere around the head table no longer resembled an ordinary corporate event. Conversations moved more slowly. People listened more carefully. It was as though one unexpected moment had reminded everyone that titles could introduce a person, but they could never fully define one. Amara noticed the subtle shift before anyone mentioned it aloud. The servers who continued moving gracefully between the tables smiled at her with quiet encouragement. Guests who might have overlooked a name tag only an hour earlier now greeted every member of the staff with genuine eye contact and sincere gratitude. Small changes, almost invisible, yet sometimes the smallest changes revealed the deepest transformations. Nathaniel watched those moments unfold without interrupting them. He had spent years studying market behavior, leadership psychology, and strategic negotiation, but this evening offered a lesson no business school had ever taught him. Respect, when demonstrated instead of demanded, spread through a room faster than authority ever could. Dr. Eleanor Pierce leaned toward Amara with warm curiosity. May I ask you something? She said. Amara nodded politely. Of course. You seem remarkably calm tonight. Have you always been this composed? Amara smiled thoughtfully before answering. Not always. When I was younger, I believed every difficult moment required an immediate response. My mother taught me something different. She used to say that silence gives wisdom a chance to arrive before pride begins speaking. Several guests quietly smiled. Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Once again, her answer reminded him of his father. Different families, different lives, the same enduring principles. Across the ballroom, the orchestra transitioned into a soft piano arrangement that floated gently through the crystal-lit hall. The melody carried Nathaniel back more than 25 years to a small kitchen in Indiana where his father repaired broken appliances after long factory shifts to earn extra money. Success had changed almost everything in Nathaniel's life except one memory. Every Sunday evening, his father would polish the family's worn dining table before dinner and remind his children that every person deserved to leave a table feeling respected. Wealth had never entered those conversations. Character always had. Nathaniel realized with quiet humility that somewhere between board meetings, quarterly earnings, and international expansion, he had remembered the lesson but forgotten the feeling behind it. Tonight, an unexpected teacher had returned both. The foundation president gently tapped her glass to welcome everyone's attention once more. Before our keynote presentation begins, she announced, I would like to recognize not only generosity through donations, but generosity through everyday actions. This evening reminded us that service is not defined by occupation. It is defined by choice. Warm applause once again filled the ballroom, this time directed toward every member of the hotel staff standing along the walls. Several servers looked genuinely surprised. Housekeepers watching quietly from a nearby entrance smiled with visible pride. Bell attendants, kitchen employees, and banquet coordinators all received the same appreciation. Amara noticed tears gathering in the eyes of an older dishwasher who had worked quietly behind the scenes for nearly 3 decades. No speech had ever acknowledged people like him before. Nathaniel quietly observed the expression on the man's face and understood that recognition often arrived years later than it should. As the applause slowly faded, one of Brooks Dynamics' senior vice presidents leaned toward Nathaniel and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "I have attended hundreds of executive events with you. I have never seen anything like tonight." Nathaniel answered without looking away from the staff gathered around the ballroom. "Neither have I." He paused before adding, "Perhaps that is because I was finally paying attention." At that exact moment, an event coordinator hurried discreetly toward the foundation president carrying a small envelope marked with the gala's official seal. She quietly whispered something that caused the president's expression to shift from pleasant curiosity to genuine surprise. She looked toward Nathaniel, then toward Amara, before carefully unfolding the letter. Whatever news had just arrived was clearly unexpected, and within seconds the atmosphere that had become warm and reflective began filling once again with quiet anticipation. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where the most overlooked people reveal the greatest strength, subscribe to Hidden Table. Here, every story reminds us that courage, integrity, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's see what happened next. The foundation president carefully unfolded the cream-colored letter, reading the first few lines in silence before lifting her eyes toward the audience. Whatever message had just arrived had clearly not been part of the evening's program. Even the orchestra sensed the change and allowed the final piano note to fade naturally into stillness. Every conversation stopped once again. Nathaniel noticed the president hesitate, something he had rarely seen during years of working beside her on charitable projects. She took a measured breath before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just received confirmation from our scholarship committee." She paused briefly, glancing once toward Amara. "There is something everyone here should know." Curious whispers spread quietly across the ballroom. Amara looked genuinely confused. She had no idea why anyone would be mentioning scholarships during a fundraising dinner attended by business leaders. The president continued, "Earlier this month, our foundation completed the anonymous review process for this year's Community Leadership Fellowship. We received more than 12,000 applications from across the country. Every submission was evaluated without names, photographs, or personal identifiers." Several guests nodded with interest. The fellowship had become one of the nation's most respected leadership programs, providing full tuition, mentorship, and career opportunities for individuals dedicated to serving their communities. Nathaniel himself had personally funded the initiative for nearly a decade. "This afternoon," the president continued, "our selection committee unanimously chose this year's recipient. The official announcement was scheduled for tomorrow morning." She looked down at the letter once more before smiling warmly. "However, after witnessing tonight's events, it seems impossible to wait any longer." Amara felt an unexpected flutter of uncertainty. She had never applied for any executive fellowship. At least, she did not think she had. The president continued reading. The winning applicant wrote about growing up with a mother who believed kindness should never depend upon recognition. She described working evening shifts while completing online business courses during the day. She wrote that leadership begins long before someone receives authority. Nathaniel slowly turned toward Amara. He noticed the surprise forming across her face before she said a single word. Dr. Eleanor Pierce smiled knowingly, quietly recognizing where the announcement was leading. "The committee never knew the applicant's identity," the president explained. "They only knew the quality of her character through her essays, recommendations, and years of volunteer service." The ballroom had become perfectly still. Even the servers standing near the doors seemed frozen by anticipation. The president folded the letter carefully before speaking the final words. "Miss Amara Johnson, you are the recipient of this year's Community Leadership Fellowship." For a brief moment, Amara simply stared in disbelief. She blinked once, then looked gently around the ballroom as though searching for another person with the same name. There must be some mistake, she whispered almost instinctively. I submitted that application nearly 2 years ago after my mother encouraged me. I never received a response. The president smiled. Because you requested that your application remain active if funding became available. This year it did. Nathaniel quietly closed his eyes for a single second, humbled by the extraordinary coincidence unfolding before him. The woman whose integrity had transformed the evening had already earned recognition long before anyone in this ballroom had noticed her. Tonight had not created her character. It had simply revealed it. Warm applause gradually filled the room again, but this time it carried a different emotion. Earlier, they had celebrated one honest decision. Now they celebrated years of unseen discipline, quiet service, and unwavering perseverance that had finally stepped into the light. Amara felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she quickly steadied herself, remembering her mother's familiar words. Receive blessings with the same humility you show while earning them. She inhaled slowly, looked toward Nathaniel, then toward the foundation president, and offered the only response that felt true to who she had always been. Thank you, she said softly. I promise I will use this opportunity to help someone else believe that where you begin should never decide where you are allowed to go. The applause continued long after Amara had quietly returned to her seat, but inside her heart the evening still felt almost unreal. Just hours earlier she had arrived through the employee entrance carrying an apron neatly folded over one arm and wondering whether she would earn enough overtime to help cover next month's rent. Now she found herself seated beside leaders whose names appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and television interviews. The distance between those two moments could not be measured in feet across a ballroom. It could only be measured by the unexpected power of one quiet decision made without expecting anyone to notice. Nathaniel watched her carefully, not with curiosity anymore, but with growing respect. He had built Brooks Dynamics by identifying potential long before anyone else recognized it. Most people believe that talent revealed itself through presentations, interviews, or impressive resumes. Experience had taught him something different. True leadership usually appeared during ordinary moments when there was nothing to gain. That was exactly what he had witnessed earlier that evening. Dr. Eleanor Pierce gently raised her glass of sparkling water. To new beginnings, she said warmly. Guests around the head table echoed the toast with sincere smiles. Amara thanked them politely before taking a small sip, still trying to process everything that had happened. Across the ballroom, however, someone else had been watching the entire evening with growing interest. Harold Whitmore, chairman of the Fellowship Selection Committee, slowly approached the head table carrying a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm. His silver hair and calm demeanor reflected decades of public service, and nearly everyone in the room recognized him immediately. Nathaniel stood to greet him. Harold, I did not expect to see you tonight. The older gentleman smiled. Neither did I expect to witness the fellowship recipient introducing herself before anyone announced her name. Soft laughter circled the table. Harold turned toward Amara and extended his hand. Miss Johnson, congratulations. I have wanted to meet you for months. Amara accepted the handshake with quiet gratitude. Thank you, sir. Harold carefully opened the portfolio and removed several neatly organized pages. There is something you should know. During the evaluation process, committee members were forbidden from seeing applicants' names or photographs. We judged only their actions, essays, recommendations, and long-term commitment to serving others. He paused before continuing. Your application received the highest integrity score our committee has awarded in 5 years. The words settled gently across the table. Nathaniel looked genuinely surprised. Highest? Harold nodded. Not because of perfect grades or extraordinary achievements. Because every recommendation described exactly the same person. Whether someone met you at a neighborhood food pantry, a public library tutoring session, a community garden, or this hotel, they all used the same words. Dependable, humble, trustworthy, consistent. Amara lowered her eyes, almost uncomfortable hearing strangers describe her life so openly. Harold smiled kindly. One recommendation stayed with me. A retired elementary school principal wrote, if you trust Amara Johnson with something small, you will eventually trust her with something important because she treats both responsibilities exactly the same. Nathaniel remained silent for a long moment. That single sentence explained everything he had sensed the instant he watched her return the veteran's envelope. Integrity was not something she performed under pressure. It had become a habit woven into every ordinary day of her life. Around the ballroom, several guests quietly reflected on their own definitions of success. Awards faded. Titles changed. Companies rose and fell. Yet the reputation described in those recommendations had been earned one unseen choice at a time. Nathaniel finally smiled and looked directly at Amara. "Tonight began because I noticed one act of honesty," he said softly. "Now I realize I only witnessed one page from a much longer story." Amara answered with the same humility that had carried her through the entire evening. "Every good chapter was written by people who believed in me before I believed in myself. I only hope I can do the same for someone else one day." Nathaniel remained thoughtful long after Harold Whitmore returned to his table. Around him, the gala slowly regained its elegant rhythm. Fine china quietly clinked against polished silverware. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying the final dinner course. Soft piano music floated beneath the conversations that had become noticeably warmer than they had been only an hour earlier. Yet Nathaniel found himself paying attention to something entirely different. He watched the hotel staff. Not just Amara. Every server. Every attendant. Every person whose work made evenings like this possible without ever becoming part of the celebration itself. For perhaps the first time in years, he realized how easily leadership overlooked those who quietly carried responsibility without recognition. He slowly folded his dinner napkin and looked toward Amara once more. "May I ask you another question?" he said. She nodded politely. "Of course. If someone had never called your name tonight, if this evening had ended exactly the way it began, would tomorrow have looked any different for you?" Amara considered the question carefully before answering. "No, sir." Nathaniel leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "Not even a little?" She smiled gently. "Tomorrow morning, I would still wake up early. I would still finish my online classes before work. I would still volunteer at the Neighborhood Learning Center on Saturdays. And next week, I would still come back here for another banquet shift." Several guests quietly listened. There was no disappointment in her voice. No hidden frustration. Only acceptance shaped by purpose. Dr. Eleanor Pierce smiled. "You planned your future before anyone rewarded it." Amara nodded. "My mother used to tell me that dreams become habits long before they become achievements." Nathaniel repeated those words softly to himself. Dreams become habits long before they become achievements. The sentence lingered in his thoughts with surprising force. It reminded him of the earliest days of Brooks Dynamics, when success existed only as a handwritten notebook filled with impossible ideas. During those years, he had believed discipline created opportunity. Tonight, he realized something equally important. Character determined what people did once opportunity finally arrived. Across the ballroom, a young catering assistant accidentally dropped a folded linen napkin while arranging dessert plates. Before anyone else reacted, Amara quietly rose from her chair, walked a few steps, picked up the napkin, and handed it back with an encouraging smile. The assistant looked embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am sorry. There is nothing to apologize for," Amara replied kindly. "Everyone has long days." She returned to her seat as naturally as though nothing had happened. Nathaniel noticed the exchange immediately. So did Harold Whitmore. The committee chairman smiled knowingly. "There it is again," he murmured. Nathaniel looked toward him. "What?" Harold answered quietly. "Consistency." She did not become generous because influential people were watching. She remained exactly the same person she was before the applause. Nathaniel slowly nodded. In boardrooms, consistency was often measured by quarterly reports and financial performance. Tonight, he was witnessing a different kind of consistency, one built through countless ordinary choices repeated without expectation of recognition. It suddenly became clear why every recommendation in her fellowship application had described the same person. There was no difference between the woman who volunteered on weekends, the waitress serving dinner, and the scholarship recipient sitting beside distinguished guests. They were all simply Amara Johnson. Nathaniel leaned back and allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He had spent years searching for exceptional leaders in executive offices, graduate programs, and international conferences. Perhaps he had been searching in only one direction. Perhaps extraordinary leadership had always existed in places where very few powerful people thought to look. As that realization settled into his heart, another idea quietly formed beside it. It was unexpected, practical, and impossible to ignore. Before the evening ended, Nathaniel knew he would ask Amara a question that had nothing to do with scholarships, charity, or tonight's remarkable events. It would be a question capable of changing not only her future, but perhaps the culture of Brooks Dynamics itself. The idea stayed with Nathaniel throughout the remainder of dinner. It refused to disappear, growing clearer each time he watched Amara interact with another person. She thanked every server who refilled her glass, even though she had worked beside many of them only minutes earlier. She listened carefully whenever someone spoke, never interrupting, never trying to become the center of the conversation despite the attention surrounding her. Success had unexpectedly found her that evening, yet humility remained exactly where it had always been. Nathaniel had spent decades interviewing executives whose resumes sparkled with achievements, but very few possessed the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who they were without needing anyone else to confirm it. As dessert was served, he gently placed his fork on the table and looked toward Amara. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I have one final question, and this one has nothing to do with tonight." She smiled politely. "I am listening." Nathaniel folded his hands. "What do you hope your life looks like 5 years from now?" Several conversations at nearby tables softened as guests instinctively listened. Unlike the earlier questions, this one carried no hidden lesson. It was sincere. Amara took a thoughtful breath before answering. "I want to finish my business degree. I want to continue serving my community. Eventually, I hope to build a leadership program for young people who grow up believing that opportunity belongs to someone else." She paused before adding quietly, "Too many talented people stop dreaming because nobody tells them they are allowed to begin." Nathaniel remained silent for several seconds. The answer was not about wealth. It was not about status. It was about creating opportunities for others. Harold Whitmore smiled knowingly across the table. Dr. Eleanor Pierce exchanged an approving glance with the foundation president. Nathaniel finally spoke. "Brooks Dynamics sponsors dozens of leadership initiatives every year. We invest millions of dollars developing future executives. Yet listening to you tonight has forced me to recognize something important." He looked around the ballroom before continuing. "Leadership cannot be taught only inside conference rooms. Sometimes it begins in places where nobody thinks to look." Amara listened quietly, unsure where the conversation was leading. Nathaniel reached inside the pocket of his tuxedo and removed a simple white business card with only his name, direct telephone number, and personal email printed in understated lettering. He carefully placed it on the table in front of her. "When you complete your fellowship," he said calmly, "if your dream remains the same, I would like you to visit Brooks Dynamics." Amara looked at the card without touching it. "For an interview?" Nathaniel gently shook his head. "For a conversation." She looked back up, surprised. Nathaniel continued, "An interview assumes I already know the position you should fill. I do not. Tonight taught me that I still have much to learn about recognizing leadership. I would rather begin by listening." A quiet stillness settled over the table. The invitation carried no promises and no publicity. It was simply an open door built upon respect instead of obligation. Amara slowly picked up the card with both hands, treating it with the same care she had shown the veteran's envelope earlier that evening. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Whether I ever work for your company or not, I will always remember this conversation." Nathaniel smiled warmly. "I hope you remember something else instead." She tilted her head slightly. "What is that?" He answered without hesitation. "Never allow anyone to convince you that your current position determines your future value. Tonight you reminded an entire ballroom that dignity comes before titles, and character arrives long before success. Companies can teach skills. They cannot easily teach the integrity you carried into this room before anyone even knew your name." Around them, the final applause of the evening rose once again, not because another announcement had been made, but because everyone present quietly understood they had witnessed something far more lasting than a successful gala. They had watched respect replace assumption, humility reshape influence, and one ordinary waitress reveal that the strongest leaders often begin by serving others long before the world ever thinks to call them leaders. As the evening drew toward its final moments, The ballroom no longer felt like the same room that had welcomed its distinguished guests only a few hours earlier. The chandeliers still cast warm reflections across the marble floor. The orchestra still played with quiet elegance. Crystal glasses still shimmered beneath the golden lights. Yet something invisible had changed. People no longer looked only toward the stage or the influential names printed inside the event program. They noticed the people opening doors, clearing tables, arranging chairs, and quietly making every detail possible. Nathaniel observed those subtle changes with quiet satisfaction. He understood that the greatest victories rarely appeared on financial reports. Sometimes they appeared in the way people treated one another after learning an unexpected lesson. As guests prepared to leave, dozens of conversations continued around a single unexpected subject. They were not discussing stock prices or acquisitions. They were talking about character. One executive admitted he could not remember the name of the keynote speaker, but said he would never forget the young woman whose honesty had transformed the evening. A philanthropist quietly promised to expand scholarship opportunities for hospitality workers pursuing higher education. The president of a nonprofit organization decided that beginning next year, every volunteer, kitchen employee, maintenance worker, and server would be recognized during the opening ceremony instead of remaining behind the scenes. Quiet decisions, small promises. Yet history often changed through moments that appeared ordinary while they were happening. Nathaniel walked with Amara toward the entrance lobby where guests were collecting coats and preparing to leave. Snow had begun falling outside, covering the Chicago sidewalks with a soft white blanket that reflected the city lights. They paused beside the tall glass windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the snow drift peacefully through the night. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence. "Do you know what surprised me most tonight?" Amara looked toward him. "No, sir." He smiled gently. "It was not your honesty. It was not your humility. It was discovering how quickly one person's example gave everyone else permission to become a little better." Amara considered his words before answering. "My mother believed goodness spreads quietly. She used to compare it to lighting candles. One flame never loses its light by helping another candle shine." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I think she was right." Nearby, several hotel employees gathered around the front desk before heading home after a long shift. One by one, they approached Amara, offering hugs, handshakes, and quiet congratulations. Some had worked beside her for years. Others had known her only a few weeks. Every conversation carried the same message. They were proud of her, but even more than that, they were grateful that someone had finally noticed the person they had quietly admired all along. The banquet supervisor smiled warmly as he handed Amara her neatly folded apron. "You forgot this," he joked. She accepted it carefully, running her fingers across the familiar fabric. Earlier that evening it had represented another routine shift. Now it represented something completely different. Not limitation, not invisibility. It reminded her that every honest opportunity, no matter how ordinary it appeared, had prepared her for a future she could never have predicted. Nathaniel watched her fold the apron with the same care she gave every responsibility throughout the evening. In that simple gesture, he recognized the same consistency Harold Whitmore had described. Recognition had not changed her. Success had not changed her. Opportunity had not changed her. She remained exactly the same woman who had quietly returned a stranger's envelope without expecting anyone to notice. Nathaniel realized that was precisely why her future would be different from her past. Skills could open doors. Education could expand possibilities. But integrity gave people the strength to walk through those doors without losing themselves along the way. As the revolving doors slowly turned and the final guests stepped into the snowy Chicago night, Nathaniel understood that the gala had raised far more than charitable donations. It had quietly restored something even more valuable inside everyone who had witnessed the evening from beginning to end. The belief that true greatness is not measured by the chair someone occupies, but by the character they carry wherever they stand. 3 years later, on a bright autumn morning, the headquarters of Brooks Dynamics looked exactly as it always had from the outside. Glass walls reflected the Chicago skyline. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying laptops and coffee cups. Meetings filled every conference room. New ideas competed with impossible deadlines. Yet inside the building, something fundamental had changed. Every new employee, from interns to senior executives, now attended a leadership orientation unlike any other in corporate America. The first lesson was never about quarterly earnings, innovation, or market share. It was about character. At the front of the auditorium stood a familiar woman. Amara Johnson smiled as she welcomed another class of new team members. She had completed her fellowship with distinction, earned her business degree, and accepted Nathaniel Brooks's invitation exactly as promised. She had never asked for a prestigious title. Nathaniel had given her something far more meaningful. The opportunity to build Brooks Dynamics Leadership through Service Initiative, a program designed to identify potential not by position, but by integrity, consistency, and compassion. The initiative had already transformed hiring practices throughout the company. Managers now spent time volunteering beside applicants during community projects. Promotions considered mentorship and service alongside performance. Hospitality workers, maintenance teams, administrative assistants, and security officers all participated in leadership development because Nathaniel believed wisdom could emerge from any corner of the organization. The idea had spread far beyond one company. Universities requested presentations. Nonprofit organizations adopted similar programs. Business schools began teaching the story of how one ordinary evening challenged extraordinary assumptions. Yet Amara never described that night as the moment her life changed. Whenever people asked, she simply smiled and answered, "My life changed long before that evening." That was only the night other people finally noticed. Nathaniel often repeated those words during leadership conferences across the country. Standing before thousands of executives, he would hold up an ordinary folded banquet apron preserved inside a simple display frame in the company's innovation center. Visitors frequently assumed it represented humble beginnings. Nathaniel always corrected them. "It represents something much greater," he would say. "It reminds us that greatness often arrives wearing clothes the world overlooks." The old veteran whose envelope had unknowingly started everything remained close to both of them. Every Veterans Day, he delivered the same speech, ending with one additional sentence that had never appeared in his original notes. Honor begins with noticing the people everyone else forgets. Harold Whitmore eventually retired from the Fellowship Committee, but before leaving, he created a new annual award recognizing quiet leadership demonstrated through everyday actions. Dr. Eleanor Pierce expanded scholarship opportunities nationwide for students working in hospitality while pursuing higher education. Even the Crown Meridian Hotel introduced a tradition of inviting staff members to opening ceremonies, recognizing that service deserved visibility, not invisibility. Years passed. Markets rose and fell. Companies expanded and reorganized. Headlines came and went. Yet one story refused to fade because it had never truly been about a gala, a scholarship, or a billionaire. It had always been about a choice. The choice to do what was right without expecting applause. The choice to see dignity where others saw only a uniform. The choice to remember that influence reaches its highest purpose only when it lifts someone else. On quiet evenings, Nathaniel sometimes stood beside the large windows of his office overlooking the city lights and reflected on the 5 words that had unexpectedly changed so many lives. He smiled whenever he remembered them because he now understood their true meaning. He had believed he was calling one waitress forward. In reality, character had been calling everyone else to become better. And perhaps that is the lesson worth carrying long after the lights fade and the ballroom grows quiet. Power may command a room for a moment, but grace transforms it forever. Wealth may open doors, but integrity determines what happens after we walk through them. And sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody thought to notice until kindness revealed who they had been all along. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Hidden Table and join a community that believes true character is revealed not by power or status, but by courage, integrity, and kindness. Thank you for watching. And until next time, we'll save you a seat at the hidden table.